Thanks for joining us for today's edition of Why I Got In. I'm your host, Sky Wind, and we're here to give it to you live and direct, so stay in effect. Today's guest is an illustrator, an animator, and a digital artist. He's a Georgia native and a good friend of mine. Please help me in welcoming Jared Hunter. Well, welcome to today's edition of Why I Got In. I am hanging out with my good friend, Jared Hunter. And Jared is an animator and an all-around artist and creative. And Jared, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Tell me a little bit about like what you do and why you got into being an animator.
Well, what I do right now is my title kind of changes at my job based on what I do, but it's safe to say I'm more a graphics generalist. You know, I can do some motion graphics, I can do graphic design, 3D, 2D, animation, illustration, etc. And so it's a nice set of skills to have. Some of my skills are stronger than others naturally, but it has afforded me, or it's made me employment-wise very attractive to marketing departments, because they, by default, this sort of employment, this sort of education, sort of lends one to constantly keeping abreast of what the new trends and styles are. Even if you don't have the software, you're paying attention to what the new flashy software packages are, whether or not they're worth it. And of course, when you study a lot of different types of artworks and mediums, you tend to know how to get by without the latest stuff. You know how to, I can do that in After Effects this way, or I don't have that program, but I can do this here, that sort of thing. And I mean, you still keep learning as much as you can. You watch your tutorials and all that sort of thing, but you don't lose heart as easily when you see some flashy stuff that you don't have. You're like, okay, how could I do that? Or a good design doesn't require lots of flashiness anyway. I mean, I've seen tons of amazing work, motion graphics people, 3D stuff, and it's on like those websites that sell them as templates. But you're like, who's going to need a fire-breathing dragon as part of their logo intro? That looks beautiful. It's great. Would have worked for Harry Potter, but not a lot of money bag corporate people are going to be looking for that sort of thing. But that's also where I'm happy for the education I got at Georgia State, because that's where I learned about drawing, painting, and printmaking. The point being, it was very focused on ideas and concepts and technical execution, but they wanted you to have a strong idea so that you start with that rather than start with something weak and then try to cover it up with lots of flashy effects, like Hollywood.
So, yeah, that's a lot. But we're going to break that down and kind of see how you got there. So we met when we were in high school, and you were already a really talented and prolific artist at that point. Let's take it back even further. When did you start developing an eye for art, and what was like your environment like?
Well, I knew I liked drawing. And for myself personally, my memories start around the age of 7. The ones that I can really recall. And I liked drawing from that age that I remember. And so I just liked to draw a lot. And I was really lucky to have a mom that, she's still alive, but I was really lucky to have a mom that did not discourage drawing. She would have been more than happy if I'd have wanted to study law or medicine, but she wasn't bothered that I wanted to do art. She was always very, unquestionably supportive of that. And, I never really bought into the whole starving artist thing. I mean, that's happened before, but I mean, whatever, that doesn't mean it has to be you. So that's the attitude I kept. And I kept drawing and drawing, and I wasn't good for a long time. Still, sometimes I question my skill, but, but it didn't matter because I still like to do it. Anyone who has a thing that they want to do, whether or not they're the best at it, the desire to do it just will not go away. Even when they haven't done it for a while, something in them is still itching to do it. That is something that that's amazing. It's wonderful. That's a gift, no matter what it is. So, I thankfully have received that. And yeah, so that drawing stick with me since I was 7, and still with me today. What was the other part of the question? I feel like I missed part of it.
No, I mean you totally answered it. Like, who are some of your influences? And
Uh,
was there anyone that like put drawing in your hand, or was there like a teacher or anything like that that kind of inspired you or pushed you, or was it
all
just
the
something that you kind of just
all,
started on just randomly and you just couldn't stop drawing?
all the above. Part of it was I think the initial part, the catalyst, if you will, was, just something in me was always like, I want to see if I can draw that. I'd like to be able to draw that. I'd like to be able to draw that, because you can then control what you do with it, right? But like a lot of artists, I first fell in love when I started watching Disney movies, in terms of like, really, really wanting a hardcore. And my first Disney movie that I remember was The Little Mermaid. And I remember just, thinking it was so cool how they were drawing things that were underwater. I remember just Ursula, even as a kid, not knowing all the mechanics of animation, but, you have a certain level of intelligence nonetheless that picks up on things, even if you can't put your finger on them. And just seeing how I was like, wow, they made an octopus move like that. And, they're just making her move and do all these crazy things. And how are they doing that with all that hair? And I remember just being wowed by that. So Disney, and then there were other artists that made it look easy when it wasn't. One of the more obscure names now, not always, I don't think, was Ruth Thompson. She was, have you heard of that one?
Yeah, I know Ruth Thompson.
So even though it's very fantastical, which is not, I'm not saying that as a pejorative. Some people sort of think fantasy art and be like, oh, whatever. No. It still requires knowledge of anatomy and study of humans and animals, and obviously technical skill and just good ideas. Ruth Thompson, Jim Davis, and his drawings were much more simple, but they were consistent and had such wonderful volume. Now he hasn't drawn his own Garfields for a long time now, but it came from somewhere, and that's him. And then when I got towards high school and college, when it was like serious hardcore time, it may sound cliche, but I got really into the Italian masters, Da Vinci's notebooks, the Codex Huygens. I think I'm pronouncing that right, maybe not, but just manuals of how to draw. And I've got several of his, copies of his manuscripts. And also Charles Brun. He was it's been so long since I've looked at him, but he was French court painter, if I'm not mistaken. Beautiful drawings. John Singer Sargent, known for his paintings, but his drawings were just out of this world. He's one of those artists that just makes it look so simple. You look at how clean his drawings are, and just how practically perfect they are without being photos. And you look at art like that, and you start to see how you don't have to draw photorealistically to have a fantastic piece of art. I'm not knocking anyone who draws photorealistically. That's a talent unto itself. It's amazing, phenomenal, credit where it's due. But the idea that you can still draw on a level that's identifiable with photorealism, and it's not, I mean, come on, and drawing in a certain style conveys certain things, that feelings and emotions and ideas, that I don't think I can personally, which I'm just speaking for myself, even if I was the most amazing artist in the world, could capture if I was just drawing photorealistically. I mean, you look at paintings from the Renaissance or any number of eras, Da Vinci, that's not, in my opinion, photorealism. It's just highly rendered painting, and you don't get that sort of softness and depth, in my opinion, when you just, I don't want to say when you just take a photo, because that's work. Taking photos is work. Different strokes for different folks. Some people are going to get offended by me saying that, but you
You know,
can't please.
it's interesting that you say that because you talk about the Da Vinci journals, like the drawing journals. A
Yeah.
lot of my early photography work was based off of the sculptures.
Mhm.
So
Yes, and you can see that in your work too, because of but see, looking at your work, that's why it's easy to argue that photography is an art medium into itself, because you can't, you know, you're focusing on different, in your work you're focusing on different parts of people's bodies, and then you're also putting that into composition with cityscapes and other background elements that that's not just here's a picture of a flower, you know,
yeah,
um, but
I
you've
mean,
got an eye for that
I
sort of thing.
yeah, I do that because I was jealous of you guys, like you and my uncle and people who could really get that thing out of their mind's eye onto paper. You know, I wasn't able to. I wasn't blessed with that skill to the ability you guys were, so I had to find my own way to get the vision
Well,
across.
that's funny. That's funny you say that. You did ask if I had a teacher, and I've had a few that I've loved, but one, God bless him, his name is Paul Rodiker, and he's still drawing, and he still posts pretty great drawings on Facebook. But he was probably the most hardcore teacher I've ever had. He was at Georgia State, probably the most hardcore in terms of really getting us to push ourselves when we draw and just think outside of our boxes and really kind of form a relationship with our tools
Mhm.
and with our eyeballs and our brains. Because the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people say, I can't draw a stick figure. And some people probably, I will say, are not predisposed to drawing. But Paul Rodiker taught us that drawing is about seeing. And it really, really is. You know, because, you know, when I was in high school, I didn't want to do this whole oval with a line through it and tubes for arms. I just wanted to get right to fingers and muscles and veins. But no, you know, you can't really go into all that until you start seeing those basic shapes. And when you start drawing a portrait or even a character, you know, you've got to think about, you know, what you've seen, what you're observing from your references, what shapes those are, and seeing the relationship of one thing to another, from like anything from the big toe to the kneecap, from the, you know, the corner of the eye to, you know, the navel. Those, that might sound ridiculous, but, you know, people who have been drawing for a long time, at least in my opinion, the way I do it, which I know I'm not alone, that's where the sight comes in. And even, you know, I would draw a figure in his class. He'd be like, why didn't you draw the background? And, you know, that annoyed me at first. But then once I started doing it, I started seeing, you know, when you start incorporating that, not only is it more interesting, you know, that background, everything in that you are seeing is a map to how you construct the proportions properly. You know, it takes practice, yes, but, you know, you start becoming more grateful. I like drawing, when I draw humans, I kind of like drawing older people now, because they have so many features and things on their face that help me to just, you know, see the relationships between those things. And it's harder for me to get the proportions wrong. I like drawing pretty sexy people too, but sometimes they prove to be more challenging as a result, because, you know, their features are just a lot more streamlined. And obviously that's not a criticism. It's just, for me personally, older people, you know, that whole visual relationship comes into play more. But it does with younger people too. You just there's just less landmarks to work with.
Right. The Fibonacci is skewed a bit
A
once it's over.
pinch. Of course, if they're super ripped, then you get more detail back in there again, so that's fine. But then you don't want to. I'm not going to go off on too much of a tangent here. But you know, you don't want to draw too many ripped people. Otherwise, you may as well just go draw anime, where everyone has a 12 pack, and it's just not interesting anymore.
Mhm. I mean, I think there are different grades to that too, though. You've seen a lot of variation in anime and art.
You do, and I watch anime, so that wasn't the best choice of words.
Yeah, so I know you do. And speaking of which, let's talk about some of your like art influences. I mean, we talked about art influences kind of through time, but like
Yeah.
what were you watching when you were a kid? What kind of toys were you playing with, like outside of your drawing?
Oh man. Well, okay. This is going to sound kind of dumb, but I'll explain it. One of my favorite things to play with when I was a kid, to be honest, was just a plain old stick, because sticks could be swords, they could be wizard staffs, they could be, you get two, you have a bow and arrow, it could be weapon, so you could do any number of things with that. And that, I think, is part of what, was behind it, is what helps you to be a more imaginative artist, because it's just a stick, right? But you see, just like with a line or a shape, you see all the different possibilities that can come out of that. Yeah. So I really liked going outside and just finding a nice stick and just, becoming any number of characters with it. And it became any number of things. What was I watching? A lot of stuff that you'll recognize. The original Thundercats, the 90s, classic. I would get off the school bus and dart home to watch that. Then, of course, couldn't miss the Thundercats, the 90s Spider-Man, the 90s X-Men. There was this really cool, I forgot who the studio, I think it was Fox when they had an animation studio in the 90s. They had their own version of Peter Pan where the Lost Boys could fly.
Yes, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
I liked that. The Pirates of Dark Water. That was really great. And obviously, there's that Mario and Zelda cartoon. And then when anime hit the scene for me, I mean, when it, came more mainstream over here, or in its earlier introduction, like a lot of other kids, I was watching whatever was on. So Dragon Ball Z, I was watching Sailor Moon. When Toonami got big, I was watching almost anything on there. So there's lots of Tenchi Muyo, Yu Yu Hakusho.
Yeah.
So those were all really great influences in terms of, I will say this, I knocked anime unintentionally a few minutes ago, but I did want to try my hand at that, because those, obviously anime has its own charm and grace when it comes to rendering females. And of course, the last few years they've applied more of a, not a feminine touch, but a more graceful touch to their male figures as well. Not that there's anything wrong with a masculine, quote unquote, rugged look, but, I remember having a notebook full of my first attempts at anime, which no one shall ever see. It's sort of like Goya's dark paintings. After I'm dead,
it was this.
it's just like, we're not gonna discuss that. Even now, I could draw anime now, but I've been so long out of it that I would need a couple of weeks of reintroduction before I would show anyone anything.
I'm sure I've got a photo laying around somewhere.
You might. I mean, now when I did my first AWA with a table, I was drawing more anime then, and I wasn't so ashamed of it. I hadn't learned much about digital art yet, so I was kind of in the Stone Age. But at the same time, it kind of got me more attention, because people were like, wow, you actually drew this on paper? So, and to be honest, I don't regret that. I still draw on paper on occasion. It's smarter to do it digitally in terms of professional work, but I like to be able to still have those real marks. And, I'll find myself, I'll be drawing on paper, and I'll try to I'll do my two fingers like this and try to zoom in on the paper, and I just forget for a half second this is a computer. So those shows like that, basically,
Interesting. I kind of picked up two things in there. It's one is between sort of your toys and your choices of entertainment. It feels like you liked the stick because it gave you this cerebral imagination with an inanimate object to source it through.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That sort of corresponds the same way with the type of shows you watched. How do you think those type of creative choices, or those things subconsciously helped you develop your personal art style? And what do you think that is now?
I'll start with the last part of that question first. It's funny you asked that. I've kind of been asking myself what my own art style is the past few months, because when I look at my the body of work I have, I still don't feel like I've discovered something that's uniquely mine. I mean, some people can look at my drawings and say, oh yeah, you drew those. but I'm still, and that's okay, I guess, but I still don't feel like I've found that thing that is obviously me. Now, part of me is okay with that in the sense that I like to be able to do other styles to be more marketable, or in case I ever work on a team, you know, um, I'll be able to, with some time, pick up that what style, whatever that is, so that we can all work together to produce something. But it would be nice, and I'm working on it, to develop a style that's as recognizable as, say, Chris Sanders or Ross Tran. Those, especially Sanders. I mean, the way he draws his pinups, but in that just so uniquely his way. And Ross Tran too. It's funny. Some artists get a lot of flack for only drawing pretty girls, but and I can see why people say that. But then you got to look at these same artists who seem to do that. You got to look at what else they can do. I mean, Ross Tran does some really great, really great landscapes. And to be honest, if he's making money selling, beautiful women pictures, then I mean, don't hate. Same thing with Chris Sanders, because those guys, they had to draw so much and make so many crappy drawings before they got to that style that was theirs. I don't want to say crappy because I haven't seen them. Maybe they have no crappy.
It was progression. I mean, I would definitely say that there's a number of, with anything, there's a number of hours you have to put into it. But I mean, with that, like, there's so much time with hand repetition and development of stroke and pressure and all that kind of stuff. Lighting, pen choices, or pencil choices, or marker choices, or how you lay all that down. There's so many elements and aspects to what makes that unique in them.
Yes. So. And in a way, you kind of have to. Well, I can't. Obviously, all this I speak for myself only. I look to those and many other artists, but in a way, sometimes I have to disengage, because you'll find yourself drawing and say, in this drawing session, I'm going to focus on noses and getting the planes of a nose right. When I say right, I mean understanding that they're there, and being able to draw that out, whether you're using shapes or line or both, or whatever. And when I say sometimes you have to disengage it from looking at other people's art, is I myself will get stuck in, well, it doesn't look like that. I'm like, you're not trying to look like them necessarily. Now, borrow from them what you like about it, but what I myself end up doing without thinking about it is trying to copy that style. And number one, they're the best at their own style. And two, then I'm missing the mark. The point was, and the example I gave was to understand the volume, three-dimensionality, and form of the nose, human, animal, whatever. So sometimes I'll be doing that, and that also is going to help me to find my own unique style. Look at those guys, see what you like about it, try to understand their process, what they did. But in the end, you've got to, learn what you can, but don't duplicate it. Just take what you admire about it. If it works for you and you can, make it your own in your own way, terrific. Otherwise, if you can't do that, like myself sometimes, I just have to take other artists out of it, know that they're there. But in that session of drawing practice, I have to force myself to, like, at that point, just look at a photo of something. Like, not another piece of art, but a real nose, a real cat nose, a real dog nose, or whatever. And just work on that, because the point is to understand that. And, what is the point of a practice session? To progress. And if you're spending too much time agonizing over the fact that it doesn't look exactly like this other thing, then you're going to waste your time, because there's trillions of ways to draw one thing, So that's a really long answer. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's what people need to understand. Everything shouldn't be a short explanation. I want people to really get an opportunity to understand the mind and thoughts of what the creative process is, and the amount of work, and what it takes to have a career in this industry, and what the different careers in this industry look like. So
sure.
Most people don't really get the opportunity to have this. Think about your cousins or your aunts or the average person on the street, they don't really get a chance to see how much development it takes to do these things.
Mm.
So for um, those whom are interested in getting in the career or have someone that is really talented and they want to push them, but they don't know how to push them,
Yeah.
this could be a platform for those types of people.
Sure.
Speaking of which, when you decided that you wanted to be a professional artist and you started applying for schools and going that path, what was the reception for you? And
What was the what for me?
the reception, how did like your family and people,
Oh,
what was the thought process? Because most people would say, oh, I want you to be the doctor or go get the good job. What are you going to do as an artist?
I was really fortunate. I was very fortunate. I didn't really get a lot of flack for it. I think what helped was that I had a very, by the time it was time to go to school, I had a very focused vision of what I wanted to do, which at the time was to be a full-on Disney animator. And, if you can make it in that to a certain level, I've heard all kinds of alleged, not alleged. I've heard responses from people on both ends of it. You can make decent money as an animator. You'll starve to death as an animator. Just like with anything else, everyone has a different experience. So after a while, I was like, when I would tell someone I wanted to be an animator and they started going on and on about how hard it was and you're not going to make any money. You know what? Let me do this. I know you don't actually care whether or not I do this. So, I think that having that attitude helped. Like the way I approached it when I would tell people after a while was, I had to sort of have this attitude of, this is what I want to do, and we're not going to argue about this. My mom was very supportive, and my stepfather was too at the time. But again, it helped to have that focused. To have that focus, they had seen me drawing over and over and over. They could tell it wasn't some whim. It wasn't some, oh, that looks kind of cool. I just want to draw for a living. That'll be fun. And, it'll be easy. No, I mean, it was, they saw me going through the process of practicing and being frustrated and being red-eyed from just being up so late. And because I refused to let a drawing go. Now that was my mistake, because sometimes you do need to let one go. But so that was helpful, having that definitive focus on what you wanted to do. But I also, I think what also helped was I was also open to, when I declared what my major was at Georgia State, I'll be honest with you, I forgot what my minor was. But, I was open to other career paths if animation didn't pan out. But it also helped that I went to college again after Georgia State, because again, they taught drawing, painting, and printmaking, which are great things to learn the traditional arts. But obviously, if you want to be a professional, you need to know how to use digital tools. So that's where our Art Institute came in, and I feel really fortunate in that way. Having those combined educations really helped a lot. But again, I was very fortunate to have the support that I did. If people are out there and their family or friends, I'm sure they're well-meaning, are telling them that it's a dead-end job. You're not going to make any money. I can't tell them just to ignore it, only because it's not that simple for them to ignore, people who aren't that much in their life. But just know that people have done it before. They'll do it again. And to be honest, if people are out there making millions of dollars, unboxing things on YouTube, it's entirely possible for you to make a living as an artist. Being focused is going to help, and being serious about it, not just thinking you're going to, draw pretty things and make a living. You can, if you're like Ross Trent and had done that for years and years and have proven talent. But again, just it's doable. It's possible. If anyone's giving you flack about it, it's ultimately your life. And if you feel good about it, then there's no reason for you not to go ahead with it. Be open, be flexible, but don't be deterred by, someone who isn't you, who isn't inside your head or your heart, trying to tell you that that's no good. It's nonsense.
Well put. Well put. Um, in that beautiful soliloquy, you talked about wanting to be an animator.
Yeah.
And thus far, you haven't gotten the opportunity to animate for Disney, but you did get to do an internship very early on with them.
Yes.
Talk about that experience.
So even though that didn't result in an animation job, that was still pretty irreplaceable. Um, I mean, obviously, because it was just a lot of fun. Your attitude was everything in that internship. For all the CPs out there, you know what I'm talking about, college program.
Yeah, CPs. CP
Yeah,
alum.
Skylar knows a little bit about that, doesn't he?
Yeah,
Uh,
there too.
but yeah, for the record, Magic Kingdom and Studios, Food and Beverage, and ODF, and attractions. And anyway, that taught me, that was probably my first foray into like a corporate culture that was pretty prevalent as part of my life. Anyone who's gone through that knows the training you go through initially, and that while you're allowed to have your own life, if you're working for Walt Disney Company or Disney, you are basically an ambassador for them everywhere you go, more so than even at normal jobs, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true.
But it was a fantastic experience. I didn't do any artwork that they commissioned or anything like that. But when I was working at the mansion, I remember I did a poster for it that was just for us cast members, and it went up. I put it up in the break room, and then and a lot of people were, not a lot of people. I will say it was not uncommon to put drawings, just fan art and stuff in the break room and attractions. Like at Pirates of the Caribbean, there was one, I think, and it disappeared one day. Now, I prefer to think that someone liked it and took it. They might have just trashed it, but um, but it even down there though, people would tell me, they would ask what I wanted to do. I would say I would like to be a Disney artist, and you hear the same schlock all the time. Oh, you and everyone else, you and everyone else, you and every yes, me and a lot of other people. What's the problem? I don't understand why people, I don't understand this almost pleasure people take in just pissing on other people's ambitions. It's like when someone tells me they want to be an NBA player or or they want to be an influencer or something that doesn't sound like a normal job or easily attainable or dependable. It's like, okay, I'm not going to rain on their parade. I have my opinions about those jobs, but at the end of the day, the facts are it's possible. So I'm not going to go telling anyone, you can't do that for a living. It's impossible. Nonsense. We see it all. We see people making money on things that wouldn't appear to make money all the time. Not that making money is the point, but the point is they're doing what they love to do. And to be honest, that's really where that success comes from, I think. Yes, a lot of people have tried to make a living on what they love and didn't make it. Yes, I know. A lot of people have tried and failed, blah, blah, blah. What about you? You're still alive, you're still kicking, I can't help it if you've given up, but I haven't. And I'm 35, and, I could have by now, but the art in me won't stop talking to me. So I can't give up. It's just not an option right now.
You're hearing the voices.
The voices, yes.
The voices
Yeah.
are art.
Yeah, I was like, I made some tea the other day, and I put the teapot down and the cup down, and I filled it up, and I put some mint leaves in it, and I just looked at it, and I was like, that would make a really nice drawing. Look at the colors, look at the composition, look at the. I wonder if I could capture the reflection of that tea with a pencil, Mm-hmm. So it's things like that. It's just it's unprompted motivation, wanting to try it, even if it doesn't work out. You're like, okay, let me try something else. That sort of thing.
So that's dope. So speaking of trying something else, once you got back from Disney, you got into sewing and costume making.
Yes.
How did that come about, and what were some of those first pieces like?
Okay, so I have to apologize to to the anime industry, although I never meant to insult. They've influenced me more than I've thought now that you're asking me these questions. I really loved, everyone who watches anime knows that a big thing in anime is costumes. I mean, you have the craziest, coolest out there costumes in anime. And I remember watching them when I was preteen and teenager. And that was something I would focus on when I would try to draw it. And that never really left me. And I'll never forget, if I ever go anywhere with this stuff, I got to remember to thank publicly my friend Jessica Lewis. She was sewing one day at my job. We were working at the Woodruff Art Center. And she was just sewing a little piece of a little accessory she was making for a costume. And I was like, what do you got there? And she started answering my questions. And I remember thinking, are you kidding? You just made that? And so she got me into actually sewing. And the more I started sewing, the more I started, seeing what other materials people use to make something. And the more I, observed that, the more I started observing outfits as a whole. And so I would go to movies and shows and start noticing a lot more these costumes and those costumes. And when I was doing it long enough, observing long enough, I started even appreciating stuff that wasn't like, quote unquote, complicated, like the period work. That's all super complicated stuff. But to be honest, even dressing or coordinating modern day pictures, I started to gain an appreciation for that. Like when Phantom Thread won a few years ago. Now, obviously, that was a fashion movie, but even the clothing and the people that weren't the main character or the muse character, if you will, I was like, wow, look at the cut of that jacket. Look at how well that's presented. You start noticing those things, and the idea that you can use a costume to communicate things about a story or a person, whether it's obvious or subtle, I always thought was fascinating. Adrian, designer from the mid to early 20th century, was talking about how, I don't have the quote, I have the quote written down, but it's not with me. But the point is, he said, a good costume, a good design can communicate an entire scene through the expedient of the costume or the clothing. It's something along those lines. I wrote it down, and I think it's on my desk at work, which I'm obviously not at. But I keep that sort of thing, that sort of quote close to me because it reminds me, and he was a wizard at what he did. It just reminds me that idea, that design, that concept, you can communicate any number of things through design. And in his case, it was clothing and fashion. And if you just Google Adrian fashion or Adrian costume, you'll see some very, very glamorous stuff. But that also was part of, what the world was, the nation was going through at the time. That glamour helped people to escape from the woes of the late 20s and early 30s. But yeah, I got into costume just through, I guess anime started it, and then Jessica nurtured it. And then I started walking on my own 2 feet after a while. I still can't sew like Jessica can, but I have the tools to learn how. And I know, and now I do more accessory work like the scale work you've seen. And those I feel pretty comfortable with in terms of just making something. And then, of course, having that foundation, I feel comfortable just learning more and moving on and making more complex things.
Yeah, your scale designs are incredible. I mean, everyone I've shown your stuff to is just so amazed by the pieces.
Well,
once you like, I mean, even once you get a little bit more technical, those technical proficiencies that you're talking about that you want. I mean,
yeah,
stuff really off the charts. For those who haven't seen, you'll also put the link below, and you can see some of his drawings. And I've actually used some of his stuff in my pieces, and you can see those in my book, Body of Movement. And yeah, I mean,
excellent book,
incredible stuff. Like, I saw it and immediately had to have it. Like, what do you have? Oh, let me see that. Oh no, bring all of it.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. Just bring all of it. I need all of it. Like, when you started getting into like the mass designs, let's talk about like, the materials and material choices and how you went that route, because there's the actual sewing stuff, but then there's, you know, when you start getting into mask making and other accessories for
Yeah.
characters, you know, what was some of that?
I got into mask making as a result of I got really, I got quasi obsessed, meaning that I was really into it, but was able to maintain a normal life. I got quasi obsessed with the Venetian Carnivale, and the way that they took a basic white mask and did all these wonderful complex patterns with them. Now it's not just a white mask. All the, you know, aficionados will probably at me for that, but whatever. There's just so many things you can do. And a mask, you know, the idea of it, the fact that you can take the person, you can become anything with just a mask. Now a costume helps too, of course, but you know, the masks provide escapes in a sense, and it's a piece of it's an accessory that it's not an entire costume, so you have the luxury of focusing all of your energy on a small part of the body. It's not, I wouldn't call it necessarily easy. I mean, it's simple if you have the method, but, you know, depending on what you want to do, it becomes a lot more complex, right? But because, excuse me, because a lot of us, like I myself, have had limited time when I started getting into mask making, I could make them a lot more expediently than, you know, drawing up, finding a pattern, putting together a costume.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I got to focus on just that one part of the body, I could, you know, think about, you know, full mask, half mask, three-quarter mask, you know, what kind of balance do I want? You know, what are the materials? Now I went through more than I had to, but some things you just have to learn on your own. Even if the advice is out there, you don't hear it all, or you don't, you know, you didn't, I didn't, you know, it could be something that I hadn't read yet that I, you know, if I'd have seen that before, I wouldn't have wasted my time. I started making masks out of plaster, which is, you know, you can ride into battle with a plaster mask almost. But yeah, that, not a good idea if you want to, you know, it's not the most excellent material to you make a mask with if you plan on wearing it extensively at a masquerade. For example, when I started going to the Labyrinth of Jareth, y'all should check that out, Jareth, Labyrinth of Jareth Masquerade. That's a fantastic resource if you just want inspiration. And if you wish, you know, definitely it's a fantastic party. It's a 2-night masquerade. And I started making masks for that. Because, and that's also where the hardcore people go. It's in California, so you have people in the movie industry that can really make some serious stuff going to that, and you'll see some crazy, wonderful stuff. But you know, just to tie that up, I learned through lots of trial and error, you know, what materials work for me. Now I haven't finished learning, obviously. I still want to learn how to do more complex effects and build up more facial structure so I can make more animalistic forms. But, you know, because I did that a lot, I have confidence when I see something that I don't really know how that was done. I'm like, I can figure that out, you know. So yeah, and I, you know, still love mask making, probably always will, you know.
How is that level of wardrobe design helped your overall creative process when it comes to storytelling and building your characters?
You know, it's had the similar contribution in the way the other things have. Whenever I start a mask, you know, I have to ask myself, what's the point of this? You know, is this mask, you know, and these are the fun questions, right? Is this an animal? Is it a human? Is it a spirit? Is it an element? You know, what's the story behind this thing? Him, her, it. What is it? Is this mask good or evil? You know, what kind of effect does it have on the wearer? You know, these sorts of things. And, you know, even though I'm not actually making masks with magical powers or anything, pretending that you are informs the design. You know, starting out a design ignoring completely the reality of the thing, ignoring whether or not people are going to think it's dumb. Same thing with my costumes. When I'm just designing something, there's no risk. So oftentimes when you're talking about designing for a show, people talk about you have to consider the budget, which is reality, and that is true. You can't get around that. But initially, I ignore the budget because let's start with a bang up idea, because you don't want to, for lack of a better word, abort a good idea because of something like money in the beginning. You make the thing, just go full hog all out, and then when you're by yourself and designing, before you talk to anyone, come up with all these brilliant ideas. And then just like with a drawing, a character design, an animation, go all out and then start peeling back and figuring out, okay, what realistically will and won't work with this, and how can I preserve as much as possible? What substitutes can I make? What do I need to keep and what has to go?